So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are fine this morning after we had a very nice talk yesterday evening. I also welcome Timothy Lequin. He comes from Montana State University, and as you know, he is in the night now, and I'm very grateful that he shares our conference for us this morning, but for him late night, I have to say. Tim, I do not know if you work normally this time, but if so, it's perhaps not that problematic, but who knows, yeah. But I'm very glad that you're here. Before we start with the keynote of Timothy Lequin, and before I'm introducing him, I would like to give some introduction for the session, Life Worlds in Resourcescapes or Landscapes. It's a session we do together with Gary Su, Yukang Shu, and Peter Thomas. And Peter and Gary, especially Gary, will direct later on the roundtable discussion. As it is also written in the statements before, we would like to have only 1 or 2 questions after the lectures in order to keep this short. And after all the presentation we have this morning, we will have a roundtable there where we can really extensively then discuss the outcome of our presentation. And I very much hope, Tim, that you can share with us. I can imagine it's an exhaustive situation now. Okay, some introduction words from my side, and if you allow, I will share my screen again and to give a short presentation. Just a moment. Okay, now starting with life worlds in resource landscapes. I have to say life worlds is a term or are terms that is often used in the scientific debate today. We combine the data of gaining access to the worlds of experience and perception of past societies and individuals. The analysis of daily practice and the narratives connected with it should give us an access to world views of temporarily or culturally distant human communities. In this way, we hope to understand decisions once made in their dependence to a knowledge and life practice.
Thomas, wir sehen deinen Text. Und nicht
okay, sorry, then I did wrong. Danke. Sorry. Do not know what I did wrong. Okay. Is it now all right? Do you see the presentation?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Okay, sorry for that. And still you also do see it, yeah?
Yes, that's fine now.
Okay, sorry for that. In particular, we believe that we can make the materialized partial world, Teilwelten, which are often silent for archaeologists, easier to understand. What resources, I would call them resource suppliers, for instance, perceive as relevant for the decisions is a key issue to understand how resourcescapes and specialized activities involving, for instance, mineral resources had constructed in past societies. The decision if a resource was worth exploiting or if an environment was considered appropriate to start an enterprise has to do with the level of knowledge, worldviews, and expectations of the people involved, but also how they had appropriated the resource and which practices have been established during these processes. Normally, the material evidence of production sites seems not to provide many clues about basic life world concepts. I do say seem. However, we consider practices which left their mark in an environment as a decisive factor. They seem a hint for the reconstruction of basic perceptions Might they have been driven by social, economic, or ritual, religious ideas and experiences? We saw yesterday evening, I guess, a lot of examples. Ethnographic accounts tell us about the importance of experiences to perceive causalities that decide the way of doing and the constructing life practice. So I came first to routines and technoscapes. What archaeology under brackets can tell about daily routines. Daily practice in world processes and all the social interactions that are combined with it are essential to reconstruct life worlds. In many cases, it is the embeddedness of routines to the social and physical world that allows the successful adaptation with a given amalgam of daily routines. The importance of daily routines for establishing identity and memory is obvious, and particularly discussed by by Desserteau according the urban popular culture in the 20th century. His influencing study let us understand acting routines as a mostly unreflected total system that not only influenced personal habits and beliefs, but also what was regarded as necessary and appropriate for daily routines. This concept certainly spans wider than the more usual concept of the chaîne opératoire that archaeologists, for instance, like to use explanatorily for the production and manufacturing debris. What seems important for mining is that such is established with small working gangs, as well as large organized and structured groups. And I show you some examples. Such should be mirrored in residues of daily practices. In mining archaeological features, for instance, such residues can be found regularly, and they allow a particular insight into such routines. Taphonomic investigation is therefore an important scientific approach to understand routines as such. Come to spheres of action, the archaeology brackets of habitualized doing. The various elements of a technically induced mining strategy, and sorry, I'm dealing especially with mining, certainly had ample impact on social interactions, for instance, as the elements determine the size of work and the number of workmen involved. I would call such experiences the social skin of mining work practice. These experiences and their reconstruction make the metaphor of the social skin more apparent, something that made the mine for the worker the same as the protecting suit for a diver. However, the material world of actions constitutes the spheres of habitualized doing. This allows archaeology, for instance, material studies, could also call it, as primarily related to artifacts and their contextual setting, to follow the material world as representations of cultural settings that enable the reconstruction of approaches and appropriation of all sorts of things. Rocks, mined raw sources, already adopted tools and spaces as complex settings of life and work practices. It is clear that knowledge transfer is part of appropriation processes that require some sort of connectivity between the daily routines involved. With other words, techniques and practices can only be successfully adopted if counterparting people already are acquainted to similar practices and mental constructs. Let me therefore first develop and then also develop outlines of an archaeology of habitualized doing in order to understand the development of knowledge and its transfer. And in this sense, the sensual scapes of miners and mining, for instance, is a very important point. It is the materialized reality, for instance, in an underground, that gave the frame of habitualized doings and experiences in a certain direction. And you could take every part in a resource scape that would perhaps work in the same direction. The mine, and it's, as I say, it's a metaphor for me to explain it a bit. The mine provides also access to a specific sensual world, to darkness, to moisture, and temperature and smell. As a simple example, did the amount of humidity and moisture result in specific outcomes of the work experiences on corrosion of metal gear and machinery, to the slippery of ladders and pedals, and the stress to personal clothes and shoes. It also produces distinctive sensual experiences such as smells and touches of rocky surfaces and timbering, for instance. And the amount of light and the perception of space and distance are so different from up-the-ground perceptions. It is metaphorically spoken another world that comes to us, and in a way also many other resourcescapes as well. It may be briefly mentioned that sensual experiences and the concept of individualized perceptions are a particularly worthy category. For instance, dark underground working spaces. It is not since Edmund Husserl and Maurice Merleau-Ponty that phenomenology and the specific perceptions of life worlds became a major category in understanding human mental constructions. The usage of phenomenological theory in conceptualizing, for instance, dark underground, resourcescapes, practice worlds, for instance, certainly needs therefore more theoretical work. Merleau-Ponty's groundbreaking foundation of the body subject brings the mental and body experience to one interwoven embodiment, especially apparent when handling specific conditions, for instance, the dark underground. I would therefore start from a categorization of individual sensory worlds of experience in the sense of a further scientific definition and analysis, for instance, of habitualized doings. Here, the experimental and experience-specific empirical level of the analysis helps to understand further strands of action and work routines with the specific sensual side. So we may distinguish the specific sensual perceptions, for instance, of environmental changes. It is no wonder that rapid environmental changes caused by mining has, for instance, specific impacts to the mental sphere of the miners and differently also to others, non-mining groups. And this is a gap, and we see it in many also current situations, these gaps being not bridged by people. So I come to the end of my introduction. I believe that life worlds never can be completely constructed. Too much is lost in the moment of living through. Much remains only in outline, and especially for us archaeologists, only in a thin material legacy. Nevertheless, practice, experience, and knowledge are linked in a specific way. I brought it in a triangle here, which are ultimately based in a more or less distant life world. I regard mining, for instance, resource handling, with its very specific environments and doings as an ideal cognitive space to learn more about. So in this respect, I would be very interested now to hear Tim and his approach to these aspects. And I'm very curious. But before starting his lecture, I have to say, Tim, I have to introduce you a little bit to the audience. And for all who don't know him, Tim is currently professor of history at Montana State University in Bozeman, a research university that focuses on environmental history, history of technology, animal history, neo-materialism, and so on. So it's a very interesting also focus for us here in Bochum. From 2011 to 2012, Tim was a senior fellow of the Rachel Carson Center in Munich. So he has a lot of connections also to Bochum. As you perhaps know, Stefan Berger is a good old friend of you. And in 2007, he was a senior visiting fellow at the Oslo Center for Advanced Studies at the preeminent Norwegian Institution for Interdisciplinary Academic Research. And here he collaborated with a Norwegian archaeologist whom we know very well, Bjørnar Olsen, on the project After Discourse. So it's a very interesting also connection to us in the archaeology. He returned then back later on to the Rachel Carson Center in 2018 as a visiting scholar, where he worked out a grant support for collaborative research into post-World War II physical, logical and cognitive changes in global human populations. Oh, sorry. He has been invited in present papers and talks around the world, including in recent year, China, Morocco, South Africa, Chile, England, Sweden, and Germany as well, Norway, Austria, Czech Republic. So you to see he's worldwide acknowledged with his work, especially with his 2 books and his many articles, who focuses on the ways in which new material humanism can help us to better understand past and future of human and the planet. His latest book, The Matter of History, How Things Create the Past, also has a chapter on mining, which I read with interest, on copper and the metaphors of copper. So I did like it very much. Squarely challenging the conventional lines drawn between human culture and nature, Tim argues, we are best understood as inescapably material creatures whose intelligence and creativity arise from our engagement with the dynamic things around us, not in distinction to them. And his second book, also very well known, Mass Destruction, an environmental and technological history of the giant open pit copper mines developed in the American West, won, and it does show us also these, let's say, transfer aspects of his work, won the 2010 Best Book of the Year award from the American Society of Environmental History and was chosen as an outstanding book of the year. So you do see, we can be very glad to have Tim here. And Tim, now it's your stage. We listened to your keynote, and of course, it's open also to share the screen for you.